Hello, I'm Professor Allison Thornton, and today I'm here with Professor Jennifer Romig, and we are going to be discussing legal research using online sources. In other words, what is the best strategy for finding legal resources online? Jennifer, there are so many sources online. You can get lost in a whirlwind of resources. How do you go about finding the best ones?
I think the most important thing is to start with your goal, to figure out what you're really looking for and not just like, oh, I'm searching, but to nail down what you want to do.
So what kind of goals might you have?
Right. There are a lot of different goals, from just getting context and sort of a general landscape of a legal issue. Sometimes you might want to research like a recent development, a trend, something like that. Sometimes you have a specific source and you need to track that one thing down. And sometimes you are needing comprehensive research, like we're assessing our risk. We need to know everything that could help or hurt us in this regard.
Is there a most common pattern that people often use in looking at these sources?
Yeah, the thing that everyone learns because it's useful and correct is the idea of getting context from secondary sources. That is, legal information about the law that teaches and informs about what the actual law is. So starting with secondary sources about the law and then moving into the primary sources where you're actually reading a case, reading a statute, parsing out the language in a regulation. When you're learning, an area of legal research and getting familiar with an issue, it helps so much. There's a cliche, don't reinvent the wheel, and secondary sources are a way to cut through the difficulty, get context, and then you can go into the primary sources.
So to gain the context, your most specific recommendation is start with secondary sources.
Correct.
Anything else about context in general?
You want to look at the sources that you're finding online, especially because you might be trying to get an overview of the law and you could find something that literally says overview of the law, but it could be written by an advocacy organization or an individual lawyer who always represents one side of a legal issue. So in gaining context, you have to, as with all information work, you have to assess the point of view of the source. You don't really want to take things just at face value, even if they look amazing. You want to look a little further and critically analyze the information that you have. A good secondary source often will provide links or citations to primary sources. So if you have something that's just very vague, it might be easy to read, but it's probably not great legal context. Whereas if you have a secondary source that seems to give an overview and actually cites or links to primary sources, that's often a good clue that you're working with something more reliable.
And what if you already know the area very well? So you may not need as much context,
Yes.
but you have a very specific document or citation that you're looking for.
Yeah, so sometimes you don't want to start and back at the beginning. You just are like, I want the statute for X, or my industry is very much governed by this particular regulation and I want to go see it for myself. So if you have a citation, with enough information to actually go and locate it, many times you can just type that citation into a search engine and come pretty close, if not actually get that direct thing from search results. The trick there is you want to make sure that you have the actual primary source. So I've seen sometimes you can type in a citation and the most popular result is about that source, but not the source itself. Okay, so just because it's the first result doesn't automatically make a cited, when you put it in the search box, that doesn't mean that source will always come up first. The other thing to really watch out for when you're actually entering a citation in a search engine is that you don't just want a version of that source. You want the most up-to-date, official, authoritative version of that source. So I've also seen examples where, the most popular version of something might be from 5 years ago, whereas, yesterday or last week, that source was updated and it's not at the top of the search results because it's brand new. So that's something, the up-to-dateness of an individual source is something you want to be very mindful of.
And don't some of these search engines, or particularly Google Scholar,
Yes.
has a way that you can arrange it by date, which helps you?
Yes. I mean, the computer has, an online organization of information has given us so much more access to information that, you used to have to go to a law library to get. Now a lot of it is right there, but it's almost too much, right? Like you could get overwhelmed and you want to try to use the computer to work for you instead of you being sort of at the mercy of the computer. So as you mentioned, Google Scholar for Cases is a great example of using computer capacity or to sort the results by date or by relevance, and you can exercise some control over the manner that you receive the results.
Speaking of how you can be overwhelmed, what is a good way to keep track of your research and sort of know what you've looked at and what you still might need to look for?
Yes. So I think, number one, write down your strategy before you start. Like we said at the beginning, start with your goal, write that down, and then write down some detailed places that you want to look. This is where I expect to find what it is I'm looking for. Keep notes while you go of what you have done, where you've looked, did you get to the end of that, or are you still going in that area? Save results, whether it's printing them out, making a list of URLs, using an online tool to save a page like Evernote, or one of the other browser-enabled like page saving tools, something like that. So you want to make a strategy, keep notes, preserve the sources that are really working, that are right. And then you need some kind of a way to determine that you're done.
That was my next question. How do you know that you've found the right answer, that you've gotten the knowledge you need to get?
Right, and that circles all the way back to where we started with purpose. So if your purpose is to gain context and information, just to understand the landscape, you may find, one or two really good, recent, credible sources, and you read that and you're educated. That was what you came for. So you don't need to keep digging and digging if you've accomplished, what you wanted. If you're looking for an individual source and you have, critically analyzed the results and you have the up-to-date official version of that source, then you're done. The hardest thing is the idea of doing comprehensive research. Like, my organization faces a risk and we are going to work with our law firm or our lawyer to understand that risk, because this is, a really big deal. We need to know what our exposure is. In a case like that, the lawyer's job is to do comprehensive research and find all of this, sources that could help or hurt that situation. So that type of research requires essentially redundant searches until the person keeps finding the same thing over and over and knows there's nothing that I'm missing that could hurt the situation I'm assessing. So there's a lot more, stress really and repetition in that comprehensive search, because it is a risk assessment, so it needs to be comprehensive.
Right. I think people would be surprised, though, how often you do get to that point where the same cases, the same concepts come up over and over again.
Right.
And you feel like you've completed it.
Right. Online research is really fun because, you have so much information at your fingertips. It can be empowering, and having a few good techniques and strategies is a way to, like I said, make these great tools work for you.
Well, thank you so much for your comments, and enjoy your internet research.